On the morning of August 27, 1896, the British Empire delivered an ultimatum to the Sultan of Zanzibar. He had until 9 a.m. to vacate the palace, disband his forces, and surrender his claim to the throne. The Sultan refused. He believed his palace walls were strong enough to withstand British firepower. He believed his guards would hold the line. He believed the British were bluffing. He was catastrophically wrong. At exactly 9:02 a.m., British warships opened fire. Shells tore through the wooden palace, reducing it to splinters within minutes. The Sultan's guards, armed with rifles and ceremonial swords, faced Maxim guns and naval artillery. They never stood a chance. By 9:40 a.m., the palace was in ruins. The Sultan had fled. His forces had surrendered. The war was over. It had lasted 38 minutes. The Anglo-Zanzibar War holds the Guinness World Record as the shortest war in history. But its brevity does not diminish its significance. This was not a minor skirmish or a symbolic gesture. It was a calculated demonstration of imperial dominance, a brutal reminder that the British Empire did not tolerate defiance. The war exposed the fiction of Zanzibar's independence and revealed the ruthlessness with which colonial powers enforced their will. In this video, we shall shine the light on the shortest war ever fought and explore how 38 minutes of violence reshaped the politics of East Africa. This is the story of arrogance, miscalculation, and the day an empire crushed a sultan in less time than it takes to watch a television show. Zanzibar in the late 19th century was a sultanate in name only, officially independent. It was, in reality, a British protectorate. Its sovereignty, a polite fiction maintained for diplomatic convenience. The islands of Zanzibar and Pemba, located off the coast of East Africa, were strategically valuable. They controlled trade routes between the African interior and the Indian Ocean. Cloves, ivory, and slaves flowed through Zanzibar's ports, enriching its sultans and attracting European imperial interest. The British had established dominance over Zanzibar gradually, not through outright conquest, but through treaties, economic pressure, and the threat of force. By the 1890s, the Sultan of Zanzibar ruled only because Britain allowed it. British advisors controlled the government. British warships patrolled the harbor. Any sultan who challenged this arrangement risked removal. Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini understood this reality. When he ascended to the throne in 1893, he governed carefully, balancing his own authority with British expectations. He maintained order, cooperated with British officials, and avoided provocations. His rule was stable, if constrained. Then, on August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamad died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. His death created a succession crisis that would explode into war within 48 hours. The British had a preferred candidate, Hamud bin Muhammad, a compliant figure who could be trusted to follow British direction. But before the British could install him, another claimant moved first. Khalid bin Bargash, a cousin of the late Sultan, seized the palace with the support of several hundred armed guards and proclaimed himself Sultan. Khalid was not Britain's choice. He was seen as unpredictable, potentially hostile to British interests, and far too independent for comfort. Basil Cave, the British consul in Zanzibar, was furious. He had not been consulted. He had not given permission. Khalid's seizure of power was an act of defiance, and Cave was determined to crush it. He immediately sent word to British naval forces in the region and delivered an ultimatum to Khalid. Step down, or face the consequences. Khalid refused. He believed he had legitimacy. He believed the palace, heavily fortified and defended by loyal guards, could withstand British pressure. He believed the British would negotiate rather than risk bloodshed. He was wrong on all counts. Cave, with the backing of Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, assembled a naval force in Zanzibar's harbor. 3 cruisers, 2 gunboats, and over 1,000 British sailors and Marines prepared for action. The message was unmistakable: submit or be destroyed. Khalid, surrounded by advisors who either shared his confidence or were too afraid to contradict him, doubled down. He reinforced the palace, positioned artillery, and waited. On the morning of August 27th, the British delivered their final ultimatum. Khalid had until 9 a.m. to surrender. The clock ticked down. Khalid did not move. At 9:02 a.m. on August 27, 1896, the British fleet opened fire. The bombardment was not a warning shot. It was total war, compressed into minutes. Naval guns roared, shells screamed across the harbor and slammed into the wooden palace. The building, constructed for prestige rather than defense, disintegrated under the onslaught. Walls collapsed, roofs caved in, fires erupted. The palace, which Khalid had believed to be impregnable, was reduced to rubble in less than 10 minutes. Khalid's forces attempted to fight back. His guards fired rifles from the windows. A small coastal artillery piece managed a few shots before being obliterated by return fire. The resistance was brave but futile. The British were not fighting a battle, they were conducting an execution. The disparity in firepower was obscene. Khalid's defenders had perhaps 2,800 men, most armed with rifles. A few had swords. The British had warships equipped with rapid-fire guns, heavy artillery, and Maxim machine guns. The outcome was never in question. What was shocking was the speed. Within 20 minutes, the palace was uninhabitable. Khalid's guards were either dead, wounded, or fleeing. The Sultan himself, realizing the hopelessness of his position, abandoned the palace through a back exit and sought refuge in the German consulate. His supporters scattered. The few who continued to resist were cut down by machine gun fire. By 9:40 a.m., the firing ceased. The war was over. It had lasted 38 minutes. The British had suffered one injury, a sailor wounded by debris. Khalid's forces had suffered approximately 500 casualties, dead and wounded. The palace was a smoking ruin. The harbor was silent except for the crackle of flames and the groans of the injured. Admiral Rawson, satisfied that the message had been delivered, ordered his forces to stand down. British Marines landed and secured the area. Khalid, hiding in the German consulate, was no longer Sultan. He was a fugitive. The Germans, unwilling to provoke Britain over a deposed sultan, eventually allowed him to be smuggled out of Zanzibar and into exile. He would never return. The British moved quickly to install their preferred candidate. Hamud bin Muhammad was proclaimed Sultan the same day. He signed a treaty formalizing British control over Zanzibar's government and military. The fiction of independence was maintained, but the reality was laid bare. Zanzibar was a British puppet state, and any sultan who forgot that would meet the same fate as Khalid. The war, despite its brevity, was not a minor incident. It was a deliberate act of imperial violence designed to send a message not just to Zanzibar, but to every other territory under British influence. Defiance would not be tolerated. Challenges to British authority would be crushed swiftly and brutally. The 38 minutes of bombardment were a demonstration of power, a reminder that the British Empire did not need extended campaigns or negotiations. It could simply destroy. The war ignited immediate controversy, not because of its outcome, but because of what it revealed about the nature of colonial rule and the ease with which the British Empire wielded violence to enforce submission. Morally, the bombardment was indefensible. Khalid bin Bargash had committed no crime. He had not attacked British citizens, threatened British interests, or violated any treaty. His offense was seizing power without British permission. For this, the British reduced his palace to rubble and killed hundreds of his supporters. The punishment was grotesquely disproportionate to the perceived transgression. The British justified the attack by claiming that Khalid's seizure of the palace violated the terms of the Protectorate. But this justification was hollow. The Protectorate itself was an imposed arrangement, a legal fiction that gave Britain the authority to dictate Zanzibar's internal affairs. Khalid had not violated international law. He had violated British demands. Internationally, the war was met with a mix of indifference and cynicism. European powers, themselves engaged in colonial exploitation, saw the bombardment as routine imperial housekeeping. The Ottoman Empire, to which Zanzibar had historical ties, lodged a formal protest but took no action. The United States, still consolidating its own imperial ambitions, remained silent. Only Germany, which had its own interests in East Africa, expressed mild concern, and even then, only because the incident occurred so close to German territorial claims. Within Zanzibar, the reaction was one of shock and fear. The bombardment had been so swift, so overwhelming, that resistance seemed pointless. Khalid's supporters were either dead, in hiding, or too terrified to speak. The new Sultan, Hamad bin Mohammed, owed his throne entirely to British support. He governed not as a sovereign, but as an administrator carrying out British policy. The people of Zanzibar, who had once viewed the Sultanate as a symbol of local power, now saw it for what it was, a facade. The controversy also extended to the British themselves. While the military celebrated the swift victory, some British officials and commentators questioned the necessity of such extreme force. Had Khalid truly been a threat, or had the British overreacted to a minor challenge? Had the bombardment been about protecting British interests or about demonstrating British dominance? These questions were raised, but quietly. The empire was not in the habit of second-guessing its own actions. The war also exposed the hypocrisy of British colonial rhetoric. Britain claimed to be a civilizing force, bringing order, law, and progress to Africa. Yet when a local leader exercised agency, Britain responded with naval bombardment. The gap between Britain's stated ideals and its actual conduct was impossible to ignore. The Anglo-Zanzibar War was not a civilizing mission. It was a display of raw power stripped of any pretense. Finally, the controversy lay in the precedent it set. The war demonstrated that the British Empire could and would use overwhelming force to maintain control, even over minor disputes. This precedent would be repeated across Africa and Asia in the decades that followed. The 38-minute war was not an exception. It was the rule. The immediate aftermath saw Zanzibar's political landscape transformed overnight. Hamad bin Mohammed, installed by the British, governed under their direct supervision. Any illusion of Zanzibar's independence evaporated. British advisors controlled every aspect of governance, from trade policy to military appointments. The Sultanate became a ceremonial office, its occupants serving at Britain's pleasure. Economically, the war reinforced British dominance over Zanzibar's lucrative trade networks. The island's clove plantations, which produced much of the world's clove supply, were already under effective British control. After the war, British commercial interests tightened their grip, ensuring that profits flowed to London rather than local elites. Zanzibar's economy became increasingly integrated into the British imperial system, with local merchants and producers relegated to subordinate roles. For the people of Zanzibar, the consequences were grim. The bombardment had killed hundreds, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire. Families lost breadwinners, communities were shattered. The palace, once a symbol of local power and prestige, lay in ruins. Its destruction was a physical reminder of the futility of resistance. The psychological impact was profound. Generations of Zanzibaris grew up under a system that taught them their rulers were puppets and their sovereignty was a lie. Khalid bin Bargash, the deposed sultan, lived the rest of his life in exile. The Germans initially sheltered him, but eventually transferred him to British custody. He was exiled to Mombasa, then to the Seychelles, where he remained under British supervision until his death in 1927. His fate served as a warning to any future leader who might consider challenging British authority. Politically, the war set a precedent for British intervention in East Africa. It demonstrated that Britain would not hesitate to use military force to install compliant rulers and maintain control over strategically important territories. This approach was replicated elsewhere. In Egypt, Sudan, and across the Indian Ocean, British officials pointed to Zanzibar as proof that resistance was both futile and suicidal. Militarily, the war became a case study in the application of overwhelming force. British naval officers cited it as an example of how superior technology and firepower could achieve strategic objectives without prolonged conflict. The speed and decisiveness of the bombardment were held up as models of efficiency. The human cost was rarely mentioned. The broader consequence was the solidification of colonial rule across East Africa. The Anglo-Zanzibar War occurred during the height of the scramble for Africa, when European powers were carving up the continent into colonial possessions. The war showed other African leaders that European dominance was not negotiable. Those who cooperated might retain nominal authority. Those who resisted would be destroyed. In this sense, the 38-minute war had consequences that extended far beyond Zanzibar. It was a message written in fire and blood, a demonstration that the age of African sovereignty was over and the age of European empire had arrived. The Anglo-Zanzibar War left behind a legacy that transcends its 38-minute duration. It became a symbol of imperial arrogance, the futility of resistance against overwhelming power, and the brutal efficiency with which colonial empires enforced their will. Historically, the war is remembered primarily for its brevity. The Guinness World Record designation, the shortest war in history, has ensured that the conflict remains a footnote in popular consciousness. But this framing obscures the deeper significance. The war was not short because it was minor. It was short because it was so one-sided. The British did not need 38 days or 38 weeks. They needed 38 minutes because their technological and military superiority was so absolute that prolonged conflict was unnecessary. The legacy of the war also lies in what it revealed about the mechanics of colonial rule. The British did not govern Zanzibar through consent or legitimacy. They governed through the threat of violence. The Sultanate existed only because Britain allowed it to. The moment a sultan acted independently, he was removed. This pattern was repeated across the British Empire. Local rulers were tolerated as long as they served British interests. The moment they became inconvenient, they were replaced. For Zanzibar itself, the legacy was one of subjugation and loss. The islands remained under British control until 1963, when they finally achieved independence. But the decades of colonial rule had reshaped Zanzibar's political, economic, and social structures. The War of 1896 was the moment when any pretense of sovereignty was shattered, and that loss of autonomy shaped the trajectory of Zanzibar's modern history. Culturally, the war has become a reference point for discussions about power imbalances and the ethics of intervention. The image of a wooden palace being obliterated by naval guns has become a metaphor for asymmetric conflict, where one side possesses such overwhelming advantages that the outcome is never in doubt. The war is invoked in debates about military intervention, colonial history, and the morality of using force to impose political outcomes. The legacy also extends to how we understand the British Empire. For generations, British imperial history was taught as a narrative of progress, civilization, and benevolent governance. The Anglo-Zanzibar War complicates that narrative. It shows an empire willing to kill hundreds of people to install a compliant ruler. It shows a colonial power that did not hesitate to use overwhelming violence when its authority was questioned. The war is a reminder that empire was not built on consent, but on force. Psychologically, the war left a legacy of fear and resignation. For those who lived under British rule in East Africa, the bombardment of Zanzibar was a clear message. Resistance was futile. This psychological impact cannot be quantified, but it shaped the attitudes of colonial subjects for decades. Some chose collaboration, others chose quiet endurance. Open resistance became rarer, not because people accepted colonial rule, but because they had seen what happened to those who defied it. Finally, the legacy of the Anglo-Zanzibar War is a reminder of how history is remembered. The war is often presented as a curiosity, a trivia fact about the shortest conflict ever fought. But behind that curiosity lies a story of violence, imperial dominance, and the crushing of local autonomy. The 38 minutes of bombardment were not a joke. They were a tragedy. And the fact that the war is remembered primarily for its brevity, rather than for the lives lost and the sovereignty destroyed, is itself a reflection of whose stories get told and whose suffering gets minimized. In the end, the Anglo-Zanzibar War was not just the shortest war in history. It was a perfect encapsulation of colonialism, swift, brutal, and utterly indifferent to the humanity of those it subjugated.